like to introduce Jeff Hughes, CEO of Enverus, and Anika is going to give a bit more of a proper introduction, but then also Anika, who is a managing director here at Insight, one of my favorite women to work with at Insight, and will be leading us on the Q&A and fireside chat today.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff, for being here today and taking time to speak with us. Maybe you can start by just spending a few minutes on your journey to Enverus and telling us a little bit about what Enverus does.
Sure. So journey, I've had, I think, kind of a lucky journey in a way. So I've done nothing but SaaS stuff before the SaaS term came around. So I started a company in the 1998 timeframe. I'm probably older than most on the call, so like think Netscape IPO, kind of the dawn of the internet, and we made the choice to start it as a software as a service company, and meaning people were paying us a monthly fee. It was a web-based company at the time, and so I sort of had this interesting journey where I started a startup, sold that startup pretty quickly a year later, which, like in the list of what's the dumbest thing you've ever done decisions, that would be probably the top one. But sold a year later, and then ended up having an interesting career of running software as a service companies of various sizes. So I got to go through startup to kind of early stage to kind of growth phase to kind of 50 to 70 million. I got to work inside a large Fortune 500 public company, a small cap public company, and then working across different industry segments. So start out in restaurants and then retail and then banking and now energy. And so the journey's been super interesting. Like I've seen a lot of different things in different environments. And what I always tell people is it's all the same, like the same basic things about software matter, regardless of environment. And there's different advantages to each of those company sizes. And I decided that what drew me to Enverus, which was called Drilling Info at the time, was I wanted to get away from big giants and get back to small again. And it was roughly a $90-ish million company at the time. And it kind of in my back door. I'm in Texas today, so it was an Austin-based company. So that's sort of what drew me there was really the size and kind of type of company it was. It was they had more of a startup type mentality, I would say, even though it got to kind of founder-led, got to 90 million in revenue. And so what Enverus does is the easy way to think about us is we're the largest software as a service company, kind of a cloud-based company that you think of as a modern SaaS business, serving the energy market. Energy is the world's largest market. It's really, really fragmented. So how are we the biggest in our space? Energy itself is really fragmented and really vertical, meaning what you end up finding is it's lots and lots of small companies serving various verticals. And we're one of the few that kind of gain scale at serving the broad energy markets. And we're basically a data and analytics company. So we help companies make big decisions with capital investments as one example. And we serve, an example is about, call it 2/3 of our company serves oil and gas, the 10,000 kind of plus oil and gas companies out there. And then the rest of the company serves areas like power, renewables, and kind of other aspects of energy trading as an example. And our approach is to kind of be on this mission to be $1 billion SaaS business in the energy world, serving that world.
Great. So as you know, when we acquired Enverus back in 2012, it was about 40 million in revenue and 15 million in EBITDA. Last year, you guys did close to 400 million in revenue and 170 in EBITDA. And while the company certainly had very strong organic performance, a lot of that driver of that growth has been M&A, and I think it's now 20 plus acquisitions that we've done since Insight has been involved, the majority of which were under your leadership. Can you talk a little bit about how M&A has impacted Enverus and what you've learned from all those transactions?
Sure. I think it's funny because I grew up as a startup person, I think most startup-oriented people don't like M&A because it feels like cheating. Meaning it feels like you should be able to get there organically and you're cheating and having to go acquire a company to get there. So I would say like the first 10 years of my career, I had a negative view of M&A. And it's sort of one of the major lessons that I've learned over time is just how important it can be, not just in terms of raw growth, but actually building a more resilient company. So if I had to list the things that I think are transformational to have learned, that's one of them. And then two, I'd say is most people in most companies that start out doing M&A, they do it really poorly. And you learn through all those mistakes effectively how to build a better playbook. Insight actually you guys produced a playbook that was really good a couple of years back that kind of laid out a lot of this for folks. So I think it'd be really beneficial. But for us, our kind of M&A journey in the company I'm in today started in the last downturn. So we've gone through two major recessions in energy in the last 5 years. So one was in 2016, major oil price decline. The other one is the one that we're in the middle of today. And one of the things M&A helped us do in 2016 was kind of the story and picture of the company at the time was kind of pre-downturn. It was a 95% gross retention company, 120% net retention. It was a very high customer sat. Things were going really well. But what the downturn taught us really quickly was that we were a like to have, like meaning we could be turned off in favor of somebody else, meaning our value story wasn't actually strong enough to make it through a time like that. And so we had a product problem we had to solve. And part of the M&A strategy was to broaden our capability and bring more to offer to a customer through the integration of various companies along the way. And so if you kind of fast forward, 20 deals later, and we're in the same circumstance, we're performing incredibly well through this downturn, even though the combination of COVID and oil prices makes the end market more of a depression than a recession. But yeah, we're still growing nicely through it. And the reason is ultimately linked back to those two things. One, the organic investments we've made along the way, meaning you don't just bolt things, you don't collect things. I think that's a big mistake that folks often make in M&A is meaning collecting stuff but never actually integrating it together. So much of what we bought, we had to invest in to actually get it to link up and make the other solutions more valuable. And so by taking that approach and doing that work along the way, we built a stronger company effectively. And now we're more like an operating system than we are a product, meaning that it's really hard to leave us because there's so much that we provide so broadly to your company that there might be one thing you get from us you could get cheaper from someone else, but our approach to bundling has made it such that it's really hard for you to make that choice. And I would say we couldn't have done that without M&A. In our space, because of how vertical and fragmented it is, the organic investments required to do that would have been crazy difficult. And in particular, even the people knowledge required to do it would have been incredibly difficult. So it was really the combination that made us successful. And today, I think, like as I look back, if I had to paint like a picture of what was, some of the most important things that we did over the last 4 or 5 years, that's one of them is to not only consolidate and bring these things together, but actually rewrite many of them in a way that created more value for many customers on our system. So we today kind of enjoy the fruits of that. And I think had we not done that, the outcome today would be probably similar to 2016. It would have been a really challenging market for us.
Great. And you touched a little bit on the impact of COVID, and certainly it's been a challenging time in many ways, but I think we've also all kind of found silver linings in this experience, both professionally and personally. What have been some of those silver linings for you? Yeah,
it's certainly been interesting. I'd say there's a personal side, maybe a business side. On the personal side, I've been doing this for so long now, 20 years. I've been traveling, every week for 20 years, and you get into this rhythm where it doesn't seem odd. And so when you take yourself out of that, and you're now on calls like this for most of your day, but you're at home with your family, there's a huge family benefit that I think we feel across the whole company, not just me personally, but everybody, which is there's almost a silver lining in kind of each one of these situations, but most of it has been folks being able to spend more time at home and reconnect. I think that's been pretty incredible. And on the business front, it's probably obvious, but it's taught a lot of us that we can operate, without as much travel. We can operate virtually much better than we thought we could previously. because our company's done a lot of M&A, and because we're big believers that the people of these companies are the assets, right? Not the product you're buying, but the people that you end up acquiring. We have a lot of offices because of that. And people grow roots. Telling people to all move to a central location never works. And so we've been a pretty virtual company because of that. And so I think in many ways we've kind of not skipped a beat to have gone remote. And I think a lot of companies had to go through that evolution. And then the other is I would just put in the camp of I maybe approach a crisis differently than I did when I was younger. I think oftentimes you kind of hold your breath and wait for it to end. And I think our approach today is to not let it go to waste. There's that great adage that lots of people quote, don't let a crisis go to waste. To me, the things to not let go to waste it's shocking how fast your company can move when you're up against a major problem, right? And so, meaning that take advantage of that opportunity, which is if you ever wondered, like, I wonder how we could operate if we were fully productive. You get a glimpse of it when you're faced with really serious risks. And so I think COVID has helped us, do that. And oftentimes the outcome of that is innovation, meaning that one of the interesting things about a market as it goes through that is customers have to think differently, and we're a company you come to think differently. And so what I mean by innovation is if you listen and spend more time in the field, you'll end up innovating faster in an environment like this than you will any other environment you'll see. And so we get excited about that, which is in 2016, as an example, we did a bunch of things from an innovation standpoint in months that would have normally taken years, that ended up being one of the reasons the company grew nicely out of the recession. And so we're approaching it in that very same way, which is to say, let's invest into this. Let's reprioritize our efforts to make sure that we're aligning them to what really creates value today for customers. But my point is, I think in my younger years, I would have maybe held my breath longer and sort of waited for things to get better and kind of hunker down. And I think our approach has just shifted to essentially take advantage of it.
Great. For some of our newer CEOs that have joined the Insight family more recently, what have you found are some of the most effective ways to leverage Insight as you scale your business?
Man, well, there's a lot. One is and I think this is true of board members in general, is that invite people to the problem. Like there's all these incredible minds, sitting around the table. And oftentimes I think we approach it the wrong way, which is if we ask you guys too many questions, or if we invite you to our problems, that you'll think less of us. Like it's an inherent sort of obvious thing. And so I think you learn over time to invite people in, and partly is it's really hard to add value, I think, as let's say as Insight, if you can't get into the details of a given situation. There's only so much sort of advice you can provide. And so the advice I would have to people is as you frame up a board, is invite them into the challenge. So an example is when we have an offsite, we invite our entire board to the offsite. We want board members to get the deep immersion of all the different things that are happening because they can provide better context. And then with Insight in particular, as you guys know, you have a built-in advantage with the on-site team, which no other private equity firm that I've personally worked with had the same advantage, which is in the same way as inviting the on-site team into the problem. And so an example is in 2016, when we were faced with kind of this kind of first major throw at the problem, and we were shrinking at the time, we invited Hillary and team into that problem from a pricing perspective, from a organizational perspective, from a how should we align costs more effectively, even things like customer acquisition costs and where to invest for to get growth. And so I would say inviting folks in helped us rapidly make pretty tough decisions in those early days. And I think if we hadn't, it would have been us kind of muddling through it as best we could. But I think we just simply got there faster. And so when I talk to other Insight portfolio companies, I always ask, are you guys leveraging that team? And sometimes the answer is no, I'm not really sure what I would do with them. And I'm saying, well, what are the challenges that you have in the business? And there always are some, right? And invite them into that challenge. And even if if the team itself doesn't answer the question, it's actually more that they help you how to think about it, right? And so I think that's maybe one of the biggest advantages that Insight offers.
Great. Given everything that's kind of happening in the broader world right now, how has your perspective kind of evolved on recruiting, mentorship, and broadly kind of creating the next generation of leaders at Enverus?
Yeah, I think it certainly has evolved. I think again, when you're earlier stage, this is in less sort of a company of scale. So much is done through the personal involvement of 1, 2, or 3 key leaders, right? Meaning, an example is every product decision for our company when I joined was made by the CEO, but it didn't create a very scalable environment. And the other thing is, just as an example, when I joined our company, is we had a leadership team, but it wasn't a cohesive team. The team itself, they didn't like working together. That was really clear. Meaning, there's factions of the team that really disliked each other. There were, in some cases, there's you have an A player who's a great player, but not a team player. And so I think the evolution for me has been to build a company of scale, how important it is to get the leadership team right and kind of right for the environment, meaning that, again, we had to let people go that I think were really good leaders that want to do great things, but they were wrong for our environment. And an example is in a time like today, people who aren't exhausted by it, but they get energy from it. Like you have to have people that can actually come to work right now and be excited about what's happening, and in some cases get excited about things like keeping a customer account flat, during this renewal cycle or whatever. And so I think getting the right team on the ground is the absolute critical problem, and then motivating and energizing people along the way. I think I jokingly say that's essentially what I do every day. Is I motivate, I hire and fire, but most of my day is spent asking the question of, like, who should I motivate and energize today on my team, or I'm constantly evaluating, like, where do we not have the right fit for people. And I think, again, when you're in a smaller, younger company, you tend to rely too much on a handful of individuals, and as you grow and scale. And I think the reason we've been able to get to the size we are and the profit levels that we are is because we gave a lot of autonomy to those leaders. We held them accountable, and we built the right team. And like one simple math equation is, like, if you go out with your team to another city, do you hang out together? Like, naturally, do you say, hey, where are we going to go have a beer? And we do, because it is a team, and you have fun together, you enjoy that work environment. I've been on teams where you scatter when you go to a city, and because you're going there for maybe a series of meetings, and different factions are hanging out together, like the marketing and sales people are having a beer, and the product people are over here. And so to me, it's so much about building that chemistry and really getting to a place where you really enjoy the time you spend with those folks. And it's a bit of a battle, sometimes to get, if you think about the day-to-day of what we're all going through, it's so much more fun when you literally enjoy the company and the people around you. So to me, that's a constant evolution, but I think it's oftentimes the biggest problem, which is, when I talk to others, it would be something like, well, that person's been here for so long, I don't know that we could replace them at this point. Their institutional knowledge, and, they're talking about all the reasons why they can't make a change. And we end up finding is most of those things aren't true. Meaning that fresh blood is fresh perspective, and getting the right team is much more important than trying to cover things like knowledge. That stuff usually can be gained faster than you think.
Great. Jeff, we'll really appreciate the insights as always. Want to make sure we have time for other folks to ask questions as well. So I'd love to hear what questions others might have.
Yeah, Brad and Andrea, for joining. We've changed the format a little bit, so if you want to come come on video, and this is your opportunity for this intimate setting to ask questions of Jeff with his amazing knowledge.
Amazing knowledge. Isn't it funny to say that without straight face?
Can we talk a bit more about M&A? That was really interesting. Thank you. I definitely found there were things where like it resonated with how I am thinking about the world and where I am right now. So that was great. Thank you. But can we talk a bit more about M&A? Like, what are more specific? Like, I know there's a good insight playbook. That's great. I also thought what you were saying about bringing on-site in was helpful. But can we drill a little bit more into M&A and just like things that, where you screwed up, like, we haven't done, like I'm a co-founder of the business. We've sort of grown organically. We definitely have, I could see some positives with M&A, but real trepidation around, whether we can integrate the stuff as well.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, I think everybody has to go through the cycle of doing it wrong before you figure out how to do it right. I think what things like playbooks can do is just enumerate them ahead of time, saying like, be careful with this. In one simple example, like, Anika will remember this, the first M&A deal that I don't think it's actually, it might have been the first that Anika and team did with Drilling Info when they were, say, 40 or 50 million, was a company that was a $5-ish million company. And Devin later told me it was the worst M&A deal he's ever seen in his career. And I'm thinking, well, that's a big statement from someone like Devin, right? Like, he's had a lot of M&A in his career. And so, but the reason, if you go back to like one really basic thing that I think I did wrong in my early career, and everybody does wrong because it seems so obvious, is you tend to leave the acquired company alone and leave it as kind of a separate thing. And it's because it's what they want, right? I mean, it'll be really clear almost every time if you said, do you guys want to be run as like a separate little entity where you keep your culture intact and everything intact, and you'll get some gains from the mothership or whatever, and we'll just synergize some of the accounting stuff? The answer is always yes, and that's always, in my opinion, the wrong answer, which is I'm a big fan of integrating companies. Like you can't have one company if you got 6 different things and 6 different product leaders and X, Y, and Z. And so that was the problem as I'm describing the first one that Insight went through. When I got there, it was still a separate company. A couple of years later, underperforming, the cultures were never aligned. The two teams hated each other for the most part. And so my point is the easy way out is to keep it standalone. And my advice would be to integrate it. The second is kind of obvious, but M&A either fails because it's not properly integrated, or it doesn't meet its financial objectives. Which are, to me, one of the things that as a company like us, we set out to do is to make sure that we don't have duplicate levels of leadership and that we have a really efficient team. So we almost always had a plan to execute around cost synergies early and fast. Meaning that we wanted to get to one team. We wanted to make sure that the people that were on the ground knew they were in it to win it for the long haul. And so we try to make any of those decisions the day that we do the deal. Like sometimes you have a good bit of time between, say, finalizing stuff and owning the company, or at a minimum by day 30, meaning that all financial decisions and actions are behind you. My point is, I think most companies trickle those out over a period of a year, or do multiple kind of death by 1,000 cuts. The downside is many of the best people end up leaving because they're uncertain about their future. And so I'm a big fan of driving to certainty rapidly. And then we have taken a standpoint of investing properly in the first year to do what you should do, meaning that you'll always say something like, we should do this. Like in one case, we needed to rewrite the platform that we were buying completely from the ground up because it was really not a fit for where we were heading. And I think in a lot of cases, you don't do that work. You put it off and say, we'll do that later. And so my advice would be to identify the things you really should do, force yourself to do them immediately, and put them into the plan for the M&A to begin with, meaning have the acquisition case supportive of the capital and dollars you need to deploy to build the right long-term company. If not, what ends up happening over time is you end up being like a collector. A collector is someone who's sort of collected a lot of companies over time, and maybe they do help your financial profile and whatnot, but they actually don't make your offering to customers, a more cohesive and clean offering, right? It ends up being sort of a collection of stuff you can sell. And so we've taken the stance of saying, let's not be collectors. And then lastly is, like just a blanket statement that I wish I knew when I was younger is the founders probably aren't going to stay no matter what you do. So I've taken the sort of approach that says, you can try to feather this nest perfectly, which is what we all try to do, and build this perfect home because this amazing visionary leader that you're acquiring, you really want to stay. And my point is, oftentimes you can't control that. And so we never predicate a deal around an individual staying because the math is 50-50 best case no matter what you do, even if they're financially obligated to stay. So my point is, I would be careful about deals that you're saying don't work without individual 1, 2, or 3, because the odds of that working out are low. And then secondly, you may fall in love with someone during that process and figure out later that they really weren't a team player. In our case, that example I was giving you for Insight's first transaction, that they have a visionary founder that was really part of the thesis, who left within the first year, like most of them do. But it was actually a good thing because part of the reason that the groups hated each other was because he drove that, that spike between the two companies. And so, we've kind of gotten in the mindset that says we have to be really smart and careful that we don't predicate deals on some of those individuals staying. And in some cases, obviously they do, but my point is I wouldn't plan for it.
Thank you. That was good.
I had a quick question, something we're contemplating right now. Our product is, we collaborate with Microsoft on selling the product, and there's a individual over there we've worked with quite a bit who's interested in becoming an advisor to the company, and this is like this sort of beautiful self-interest and collaboration with the partner that I'm not sure Microsoft is going to allow, but if we can work it out, it would be very beneficial for us. And I'm curious how if you've successfully done advisory boards, things like that. So I'll just give you a little bit of background. Insight actually helped SkyTap create a growth advisory board a number of years ago, and it was not really effective. It's one of those things that looks great on paper, but it takes a lot of time to manage, and it ended up being kind of just a paper exercise and didn't really materialize. So I'm curious if you've ever found ways to do that effectively.
Yeah, I would say, like, my basic advice there would be that board members are a different level, and the criteria to be a board member is less about business development and more about advice. And so
this isn't a board seat. This is like advisory board, right?
Yeah. What we're just sort of saying is, like, sometimes you put someone like that on your board, and that's obviously never a good idea. I mean, you're doing it for sort of different reasons. But we've done a number of situations where we've created an advisory group that is largely because there's some benefit, whether it be a product-oriented benefit. In one group we created was kind of visionary leaders that helped us craft kind of a future product story. In this case, more of a sales-oriented benefit. I personally don't see a bunch of downside in that. Creating those types of advisory groups seem logical.
Yeah, I mean, have you managed them? What I found is that it became a paper exercise and not real value for either side. Did you find ways to make it effective for you and productive?
I don't know that that I could point to a lot of them that have been, I'm thinking back in time, maybe 1 out of 5 was financially really effective, and the others were sort of minor benefits. And so I think the way I'd approach it is that you're sort of thinking big about what it could be, but your expectations coming out of it are relatively low. I think we all know this, but most partnerships are pretty much going to fail. Like that's sort of the math of partnerships. I think of this is sort of like a partnership in that way.
Yeah.
and so our approach is that if we did 10 of them, 1 or 2 of them are going to succeed, and
Okay.
but not a lot of downside, especially if you can kind of put it in a box.
Yeah. Makes sense. Thanks.
I wanted to ask Jeff about cross-sell after you do M&A. Obviously, you're doing them presumably to get your base to adopt multiple products. How do you facilitate that? How do you make sure that happens in practice?
Yeah. Some are easier than others because there's, I think there's these home run deals that you get sometimes where you're acquiring a product that needs almost nothing for your sales team to bring it to your current customer base, and it's literally just an acquisition cost equation and enablement problem. And so let's call that maybe 10% of the time. Most of the time, I would say you sell yourself on a cross-sell story as part of the acquisition business case, and ends up not being true, because you don't actually have enough ground truth to know whether that's logical or not. And then a lot of that, in my opinion, comes out of that first year's work to actually integrate the products in a way that creates real value for customers. And for me, the real value would be that you can tangibly describe the, let's say the dollar cost you're going to save somebody when you integrate the products in this way. And so for us, we try not to predicate a lot of the call it first year's thesis on anything unproven. Like meaning if an example is if they're able to grow the business 10% before we bought them, we're going to be able to grow it faster than that. That's fine. But if we're saying that we're predicating it on this huge cross-sell initiative that's sort of unproven, I would say be really careful of that. And that our success has come from the work required, like meaning think of it as a product problem and a sales problem is assume that the product needs a lot of work and that there's real integration activities required before that you'll actually get enough value for it to be logical. And so we bake that into that first year's work. And the reason, by the way, I described it as a year is it's easier, I think, to have one-time costs in that first year as part of the acquisition business case. It's easier for bankers, it's easier for everybody, especially to the extent those costs are literally one time, even if they're significant. And so if you believe there's a big cross-sell opportunity, my point is that probably bank on significant integration costs to make sure that you're ultimately building the thing of high value, not sort of assuming that they'll pay a little bit less for the thing you have now and pay more for it later. It's usually not true.
Got it. Thanks. I was just going to ask, do you have a dedicated sales force for each product?
Yeah.
No, we don't. So, and I'm a fan generally of not doing that unless the end customer segment are radically different, right? So the groups we have today, if we differentiate it, would be call it inside sales versus strategic sales, right? Big deals versus small. That's logical. Those should be oftentimes those are two different teams. In our case, if it's a different market altogether, like traders, is a different market, say, than upstream oil and gas. And so we generally align around markets, not products. And my general advice would be to not make it products, meaning that one of the sort of benefits you have by not doing that is products have to stand alone. And they let's say that a sales rep has a quota of $100,000. And they've got 7 products to sell. You want your product people to have to vie for their time, like meaning that to make their products easier to sell, to make it more effective, to make the ROI better. And so when a product person comes to me as an example and says, well, that sales team isn't selling my product, you're saying, well, that's your problem. That's not the sales team's problem. And you shouldn't create a quota that forces them to sell something that's less efficient for them to sell than something else. And so I like putting them in a family that says, here's all the things you can sell. And then you want the product and sales team to work together in a really efficient way, meaning holding them accountable both to the same number. And then ends up working out well. And then, by the way, sometimes what you end up finding out is that thing that you bought, you thought was a product and it's a feature, right? It's a part of another product. It's not its own. And I think this is a general mistake we sometimes make. We had to rationalize this ourselves a couple of times over the course of the last 5 years. Otherwise, you end up having just too big a product portfolio and too complicated a story to that new rep that just walked in that you have to train up, and you've got this catalog of a dozen things that ends up not being very effective. And so you end up kind of rationalizing, bundling, identifying things that really aren't products that are really more features.
So is the move then, so you buy a company, you say it's going to take us a year to integrate this on the product side. Over that first year, you kind of keep the existing sales team or something like that and have them just selling whatever niche product it is. And then you either terminate them or you upskill them to sell your general platform. Is that the kind of way to think of it?
Yeah, and I'll maybe restate it, but I think similarly, there's a couple of components I may just change the way you said it. So
better.
Well, the way I think about it is most of the synergy isn't the people that build stuff or sell stuff, right? That's where the real value is. If you believe a software company is the value is the people, that's the value. And so often, almost never do we, as an example, synergize sales reps. It may happen over time naturally out of lower performance for sure. It's mostly management and non-quota carrying and code writers effectively, and so that's sort of the way we think about it, which is why would we need all of these layers of management? We don't. We have an effective team for that today. And in terms of organizationally, my view would be the faster you can integrate into one team, irregardless, product team, sales team, accounting team, whatever. The faster you integrate, the better. In some cases, you can do that day one because it's a small company and it's sort of easy to do. In some cases, you shouldn't because, as an example, it's too young. It's a startup, and if you broke it apart into its viable pieces and moved the pieces around in your company, you'd actually break what was successful about it. So I wouldn't say there's sort of one approach, but in general, what I'd say is by the end of that first year, it is fully integrated in almost every example. In some cases, you intentionally take a year because you think integrating it up front actually is a bad idea. You either lose people or lose focus or create a problem for yourselves. But my point would be faster the better. If you could do it day one, then do it day one. And then the one other statement I'd make, just haven't done this enough times, is there's always someone who's going to say, if you do this step, like if you take this step, you'll break, this or that. And the smaller the company, more likely that might be true. But the bigger the company, the more resilient it is. So meaning that the more the company has scale, the more resilient it is to those types of changes. So my basic math would be a really large company that we acquired a couple of years ago. We integrated day one, and it went really effectively, even though there was 300 employees. But there'd be a startup that we acquired that only had 50 employees that took us a year and a half to integrate. And it's because we knew that we would break it if we approached it that way. So I think it's a bit of a nuance, and I believe this is a bit of what kind of come back to what Insight can do is sometimes it's unclear, how to apply that principle given those nuances. And I think that's where you want pattern recognition. You want someone who's sort of seen a lot of it that can say, well, here's for that particular scenario, here's what I would likely do. But my point is, a year out, the outcome is always the same.
Thank you. Do you mind, Brad and Adrian, you guys good if I ask one more?
Sure.
In these times, there's probably a lot of opportunistic how much is your strategy sort of opportunistic in terms of M&A, opportunistic versus deliberate, right? Yeah. You can probably get a deal on a lot of oil patch tech companies right now, but how much are you trying to do that versus just build something that you have in mind?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. And I think, and by the way, sometimes in private equity, you have to be a little careful because there can be someone on the private equity side, as an example, that would look at that opportunistic thing and say, man, we should do it. The numbers look good, right? And so I think one of our jobs is to make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons. And so for in our case, is about growth. So if we had sort of a thesis about a company that would tell us we should or shouldn't buy it. So can we grow it faster than it's growing today? You know, I mean, is it, or do we have something synergistic about the combination that will make it grow faster, and that we have real conviction around it? That's one. If we don't, then that's a strange scenario. Like, why acquire that thing? That's more of a collector move. Is it a long-term growth opportunity? I mean, do we actually see it opening up an adjacent market and allowing us to grow, not just next year, but it does have a consistent long-term kind of growth scenario to it? And so we sort of developed a framework that helped us look at companies. And the easy way, I know this is sort of about us, but it's you want to develop something for yourself as to what you look for. And so we bought either companies that were data companies that didn't have a software platform, and we thought by bolting that data company into our software platform that we would get a lot of value from it. Or we bought software companies that had an underlying data asset that they've not done anything with. Like, we became a company that got good at taking that data and monetizing it in some way. And so all of our acquisitions sort of fit into that framework. And then it becomes, because our problem was growth, is this going to help us grow, or is it just a good financial deal? And if it's not going to help us grow, and it's just sort of cheap, if you will, and you could just sort of grab it because it's on the market and the times are bad, we generally didn't do those deals. It just didn't make sense for the long-term thesis of the company.
Thank you.
Amazing. Any more questions? That's given me a lot of content to work with after, Jeff, that's for sure. But Adrian, Blair, Brad, Andrea, any other questions? Or Hillary, do you have any?
I have a question, which is why I came off mute. Jeff, lots of our CEOs are first-time CEOs. What guidance do you have? I mean, it's hard being the CEO because it's a lonely job. You have a board, but you don't always want to go to the board with minutia. How have you sort of continued to upskill yourself, continue your own learning process, and make sure that you're ahead of the curve? It's just a tough job. So I'm kind of curious as to your own secrets.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this I think is mistakes and learning from them. Unfortunately, and being able to learn quickly. But a couple things I would say is, having done this for a long time, is your own mental state. And an example is getting out of the scenario of saying I'll be happy when. So an example of that is to say, when I sell, or when we complete this next round, I'll be happy. And because the answer is it will come and go, and it will be shockingly like a small event. Like, meaning it will shock you sort of how unimportant the actual event is. And so it helped me to get into the mindset of enjoying the journey, because it's a journey, and and you have to get energy and enjoy the sort of the process from here to there. If not, you're sort of always looking for that next thing, and when that thing doesn't happen, like I remember our CRO saying, "I'm here until we sell," and I think, oh, we don't want you then, because we want someone who's actually in it to win it, irregardless of sort of the milestone. And then one really simple thing, it might sound funny, but to keep yourself in that right mental state, like one of the things I learned over time, and I sort of wish I would have learned it 10 years ago, was I love to exercise in the morning. That's been something I've always done, but I began meditating. And so this is a couple of years ago, and I would say it's been hugely transformative for me. And now I do it daily, and I would say it really helps me focus more effectively. And also have less anxiety about the challenge of the day. Like, you'd be shocked at how much anxiety we all carry on all the different problems, right? Because we know about them all. It's always sort of funny when you look at your own company, you think it's a crazy basket of nightmare problems. Then you look at it from afar, and it's incredible, right? And so my point is, like, your own mental state is so important, because it trickles down to everybody on your team, the energy you bring to work every day. And so, it sounds simple, but getting whatever processes you use to get there. And for me, it's a daily regimen, like how I start my day and what I do and the activities I take. And then secondly, it's sort of funny in my younger days, if you looked at my calendar, it would be blocked for like 9 days straight. And like, I had to put like a bathroom break at 2 o'clock, right? Like that sort of weird calendar. And now I don't do that. Like, meaning I actually block my calendar just to think, like to spend time. I block, as an example, a large part of my morning, because one of the things I've learned about myself is my own creative thinking time is most effective in the first couple hours of the morning. And so the last thing I want to do is sort of spend that time on my 90 open emails or, whatever, problem of the day has arisen. So my point is, I've sort of over time figured out how to spend more of my time on things that matter. And if I'm spending a lot of my time on minutia, it usually means I don't have the right leader. Like there's someone that needs to be replaced, frankly. And I've gotten much faster at that, like meaning not taking years to make that call. And especially in a company like ours, it's gone from the size it was to the size it is. A lot of times these are great people that you really like that just you outgrew, and it's hard to make that call that says, man, we outgrew that person. And so my point is I've gotten better at that, which means I have less of my calendar day spent on the things that they ought to actually be handling, which allows me to be more effective. And then, like I said, I walk in every day and I literally ask myself, this is who on my team am I motivating today? Because part of what I can do is get on the phone with somebody. One, I can help advise, right? I can advise and motivate, because that's a lot of what I do. But especially in today's world, is you'd be surprised at that 10-minute phone call and how meaningful it was for somebody. And oftentimes we don't make time for it. Like we'll look at our day and say, I just don't have time to interact with 5 people. And my point is that I think you're spending your time essentially on the wrong things, because in the end, the team that you end up cultivating is it. Like that's the end story of whether you'll be successful or not. And especially if you'll scale or not, like meaning that the smaller you are, I think the more effective you can be by sort of managing every aspect of your business. And then the bigger you get, the more you have to give up control. And that's I was a micromanager type for a long time, and I had to learn that evolution. But if someone's asking me how do I start getting there, I'd honestly say start meditating. Like that would be it. Something I would advise everybody to do. And when people ask me how, I just tell them, like, take Headspace. There's a 30-day trial. Do the trial. At the end of 30 days, you'll either like it a lot and think that it's meaningful, or you'll hate it. And I'd say it's about 50-50.
In our situation, we'd say take Calm, because Calm is our investment. But yes, exactly the same. They're exactly the same product, or very similar. But yeah, that's super. That's really actually very helpful for me. I think for everybody on the phone. Thank you.
Jeff, you talked a bit about how you structure your day. Do you have a particular structure to the week that you follow on particular days?
I used to, and it's because I traveled so much. It was this has sort of changed dramatically, but it's sort of where I spend time physically and how I make sure I'm a good parent at the same time. So I have the cycle of like what time I leave on Monday that allows me to take my kids to school. That gets me home so I can make dinner on Thursday, and home office on Friday. So I had sort of a rhythm to it, and COVID's sort of blown that up. And if there's a really big negative of it, it's that, which is like you're sort of weirdly always working now. And there used to be this sort of almost like I went to work on Monday morning and I came back on Thursday, and Friday was kind of an easy day. Like that's how I would describe my schedule. But Monday through Thursday, I was all on all the time. And so now you sort of had to develop a new rhythm. And I'd honestly say, I don't know that I've accepted the new one yet. Like I still get so much more out of interacting with people in person than I do over the phone. Like I don't like phones, I don't like email. Zoom is actually pretty effective, but I actually can't wait to go travel again, because it's better for me. As an example, I just get more out of the human interactions, and so I miss that. So I guess I'm a bit, I would say, struggling right now with how to structure my week, because it doesn't feel like there is a structure right now. But my hope is that I'll either evolve through it or things will change and return to somewhat of a normal state.
Awesome. Well, right on the hour. I'm sure there'll probably be a lot more questions, but Jeff, and Anika, thank you so much for that. And for those who joined, I hope you took as much away from it as I did. And stay tuned for when we slice and dice all of those amazing insights and pieces of advice for the future.
If you can Photoshop me like younger and better looking when you do it, that'd be awesome.
I'll airbrush you. I'll put you in my fake background as well.
All right, that'll work.
Thank you so much,
There's
Jeff.
a Zoom filter.
Jeff,
for that.
thank
That was
you.
really good.
Thank
Thanks
you,
everyone.
Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. That was really great.
Super thought provoking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank